Indian thought tried to see the connection between the two.
Are you referring to a kind of non-dualism?
That's right, yeah, non-dualism.
Yeah, I think that's a very helpful idea, and I think the quest, as people like who am I trying to think of? The great physicist Stephen Hawking spoke of one beautiful formula that would explain all of reality. This is a quest that is not unlike the quest of the great philosophers and the great scientists.
Yes, the theory of everything.
Right. Well, let's go back to your biography for just a moment, because in 1967, and this is, coming up just, I know everyone can do their own mathematics, but it's coming up on 50 years ago, just to put the exclamation point on that. You were charged with doctrinal error and I quote, disturbing the peace and unity of the church. And
yes.
It's, even though it's been 50 years ago, every time I read this, it makes me laugh, because I think, disturbing the peace of the church indeed, right? And isn't this what Jesus was reported to have done? Disturbing the peace of the religious establishment.
That's right, yes. Yes, it is laughable. But actually, when it first broke out, I laughed at it myself. Unfortunately, it was no laughing matter.
Right, it was quite serious.
But it was quite serious. And I think what happened was that fundamentalism, which of course originated in the States, reached New Zealand in 1923, and it produced a few followers among the more conservatives, and it gradually grew. When I was a student, I thought it was going to die out, but it didn't die out. And what it actually grew, and by the 1960s, the fundamentalists in our church had grown strong enough to challenge me. I happened to be the one caught in the middle. It could have been anybody,
That's right.
And in the theological hall where I taught, of course, I was professor of Old Testament, so in Old Testament we didn't have much trouble, but I started to question the historicity of the resurrection stories of Jesus, and that's what sparked it all off. And it just got worse and worse as time went on, until there's two people, one a minister, a very scholarly minister he was, the other a fundamentalist layman. They were the ones who actually brought the charges against me. And of course, as you know, I was acquitted in the end, but it never really died down. And today, unfortunately, the Presbyterian Church of New Zealand is more conservative than it was then.
Well, I want to start by saying I'm so sorry on behalf of the United States for sending that virus your way. Though I was not alive at the time to participate in that, I still, it's a very odd sort of twist in religious history, the rise of fundamentalism, and it has really infected so much. In fact, our mutual friend Greta Vosper, now 50 years after your heresy trial, is facing her own similar...
Yes, I've been in touch with her. In fact, I've met her. She came out to New Zealand. And I haven't heard anything recently about how she's getting on.
Well, I keep up with her a little bit, and she is on the advisory panel of Life After God, on behalf of which we produce this podcast. And I haven't heard the latest. Sometimes it simmers under the surface for a little while, and I'm not sure what will happen with that. But it's just curious to me that the church seems not to have, moved past some of these things in 50 years. I mean, though the United Church of Canada is more than happy to acknowledge that the story of the resurrection is mythology. They've just moved the goalposts to some other standard by which heresy might be measured, I suppose.
Oh yes, I suppose so.
You speak in various places about, in fact, titles of a couple of your books, Christianity Without God, even Christianity Without Christ. What do you mean by these expressions exactly? And do you see a vibrant future for Christianity if somehow Christianity can pivot around these new ideas?
No, I don't see a long-term future for Christianity in its traditional form. What I tend to see rather is that we live in a world which is becoming more and more secular or this worldly, and I regard this as the product of Christianity. Indeed, you can almost go back and say it's the long-term effect of the doctrine of the Incarnation.
That's right.
In other words, just as the Incarnation says that God became man, all that is meant by the symbolic word God is now within the human condition, and indeed has laid upon us tremendous responsibilities. The human race has now the responsibility not only for its own future, but for the future of all life on this planet.
That's right.
It's so serious, in fact, that we may not see the end of this century. It's as bad as that with global warming and the destruction of increasing destruction of all the diversity of life. It's a very serious matter indeed. So that we are now have to play God for the. Now, I as I say, I don't see any future for traditional Christianity. But on the other hand, we wouldn't be in the modern secular world if it hadn't been for our Christian past.
Yeah, it's almost like I've tried to grapple with this myself, and I've often thought that Christianity contains within itself its own sort of auto-deconstruction, that it was destined to pass away and give birth to something new, or perhaps in the words of a New Testament passage, a seed has to fall into the ground and die for something new to be born, and perhaps what we're seeing is the actual offspring of Christianity taken seriously.
Yes, and of course, when you come to see some of the leading symbols in Christianity of death and resurrection, then it's not at all surprising that we should have to go through the death of the past in order to see something better and newer arising out of the ashes, as it were. So I don't deplore this at all. I can see it as a real continuity.
On the other hand, in the rest of the world, outside of the so-called Western world, the developed world, in the developing world, Christianity, and in fact, even more than Christianity, Islam seems to be as vibrant and growing as ever. Is this, in your mind, a case of that part of the world and the population sort of trailing the sort of Enlightenment development of the West, and they'll catch up, or will? I mean, I'm concerned. I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm concerned that the tension in those two ways of looking at philosophy and religion could create even more tension than what we're seeing now.
Now, when you raise the question of Islam, that's a very big problem indeed. You see, I think Islam in the late 19th century, particularly in Egypt and India, began to go through a form of modern reformation. It's all dead now. And what has happened is that just as Christianity produced its own fundamentalism, Islam has produced its own fundamentalism. I like the comment of a scholar of Islam who said to me, who said some time ago, Islam no longer believes in Allah; they believe in Islam. And this is the problem with the rise of ISIS and so on in Syria. The Islamic world is in a turmoil, and it's facing the twilight of true Islam, just as the Christian world is facing the twilight of traditional Christianity. But it's running on roughly 200 to 300 years behind. And and I'm not sure how it's ever going to solve the problem, because Islam lends itself to fundamentalism much more than even Christianity. You see, from about 200 years ago, we began to realize, in calling the Bible the Word of God, actually it was written by human beings, and its human origins are now widely accepted. But no Muslim can ever accept that the Quran had a human origin.
That's right.
Of course, we know it came out of Muhammad's unconscious, but they believe that, of course, it has a divine origin, and that's the problem. Islam, it's very difficult to see how Islam can undergo any kind of reformation. There are a few Islamic scholars who see the point, but they don't dare speak of it while living in an Islamic country. They have to go to a non-Islamic country to air their views, and there are a few who do that.
Well, and you mentioned a moment ago, and I completely agree with you, that the human community globally is on the precipice of its own self-destruction. And, one solution to the challenge of Islam and fundamentalism that you're describing is, we give them another 200 years to catch up, to what the experience of, what Christians went through. But we don't really have 200 years to spare, do we?
Exactly. That's why it's so serious. And I think the Western response to the problems in the Middle East, mainly Syria at the moment,
right?
The Western response is rather inadequate, but we need people, scholars, to give some kind of insights to our governments on this issue. And I don't see that happening at all. So I look into the future with a fairly gloomy sort of outlook, because I won't be here much longer to know what will happen. But I fear for the rest of the 21st century.
Yeah, it is a great conundrum, and especially for global world leaders and faith leaders, it's a real challenge, because even the debate about what to do is actually quite contentious and can separate even. Right now, as you know, it's dividing liberals from liberals in terms of how to approach the challenge of fundamentalism in the world right now. And in America, and I'm not as familiar with New Zealand, but I've promised to move there at times when certain candidates were about to be elected president of the United States. But we tend to have our finger on the trigger pretty quickly when we face global unrest, and our answer tends to be military. And my intuition tells me that it's going to take a much softer touch to grapple with the fundamentalism that we're facing now. Though that military response, I suppose, can never be off the table. But it's a real powder keg, it seems to me.
That's right. And we're not going to solve the problems by military means at all. The days of doing that now are over. I mean, up until perhaps sometime in the 20th century, military might did really produce a kind of peaceful world. It will no longer do that. And we've got to negotiate, we've got to understand. And this is where I find it difficult, you see. I find that fundamentalists will not dialogue. You can't talk to a fundamentalist. Because they absolutely know the truth, they're not open to any different views.
Yeah, by definition, they're not really open to that.
No, that's right. So how you attempt to deal with fundamentalism is still pretty strong in the States, but it shows itself badly enough there, but it's even worse when it's in an Islamic country.
Yeah, it's true. And these are some of the big challenges I think we've mentioned too, like global fundamentalism and climate change and the threat